to the Melbourne Wardley mapping meetup. So if you have any questions as we go, you can ask them in chat or you can just yell out. There is a raise a hand feature, so I want to draw your attention to that. If you look at your interface on the screen, what you'll see is at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little hand symbol. If you click that, that just lets us know that you want to talk. So you can raise and lower your hand using that. Although I'm infinite now, so I'm going to switch back to not being infinite anymore. Cool, so that's a video facilitator, that's the Trello board, you have the link, please join up. And without any further ado, I want to switch over to Daniel. We're streaming live on YouTube. Daniel, welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're talking about today.
So I will share a little bit more about myself in a few slides, but as you mentioned, I'm the ex-CTO for Seek Asia, and Seek Asia is part of the Seek group of businesses. For those of you based in Australia and New Zealand, you would be very familiar with the Seek job boards. So today, as Ben mentioned, I'm going to be sharing a sort of a real use case where we applied Wardley mapping. I'm going to be sharing, the approach that we took, what worked, what didn't, and what we learned along the way. So before we get started, I'm interested for everyone who's joined, what's your level of exposure with Wardley mapping? So you can either share in the comments or shout out, and just give me, for some of you, this might be completely new. Some of you, you may be using it, but I just want to get a sense from each of you.
Yeah, feel free to just put a message in the chat to indicate, or yell out.
So Ian was using it 2 years ago. Brad's saying it's theoretical, but it sounds like he's read a bit about it. Maddie, completely new. Danny, completely new. A few people high level. Awesome. Okay. So this is great because I've designed the content to hopefully be understandable, whether you're in a complete initiate toward the mapping or whether you've had some experience. Feel free to, as Ben said, to ask questions along the way. There's really no way that you can interrupt me. Just jump in with your question either in the chat. Ben, the ones in the chat, because it won't be on my screen, feel free to just interrupt and read those out.
Will do.
For everyone else, feel free to just jump on the microphone and ask questions as we're going. I like it as interactive as possible. Cool.
Daniel, I just shared the Miro. Are we still using that?
So I'm presenting out of the Miro.
Okay.
There's not really a need to connect to it because the only interaction will be just sort of people asking questions along the way. Okay. But you're all welcome to check out the content on the Miro afterwards from the link, so we can share that later. But it may be just a distraction for now. So what's on the screen is the Miro. So let me jump into it. So we had a scenario a number of years ago where Seek had grown through acquisition, and we had a more complicated data ecosystem that we sort of had to think about and reason about and make some decisions around. So let's jump in. Oh, okay, I knew I'd do that. So I'm the protagonist in today's story, so I'm just going to share a little bit about myself. So I help teams create amazing products customers love to use. I've had 20 years experience at brands such as Seek, Experian, and Hitwise, and I've also worked with almost about a dozen startups over the last decade. I'm originally from Melbourne, Victoria, so hello all my fellow Melburnians. And I've worked in product development since high school, going back to the days of Sausage Software, in games development for Beam Software, and also for the sort of short-lived virtual communities. Experience brought me to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, where I was there to establish a development center for the marketing services division. And I spent 10 years in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. It's one of those places that's easy to love. And in addition to working at Experian, I also worked for a national IT firm called Prestarium, and we successfully pitched for Malaysia's immigration system overhaul. And then I joined Seek Asia, so they found me there in KL. And then just recently, I've relocated to Onehunga, a suburb in Auckland, New Zealand, where I am a full-time father. Oh, I've done it again. One tip for young players: embedding a slide pack inside a Miro presentation will trip you up every time. Cool. And then this is a very quick plug for my blog I'm writing about, Focus on Outcomes. Something I've learned over the course of my career is really to be sort of laser focused on being outcome oriented. I found it's been the most useful tool across my career. And the reason I mentioned this piece is it's because it's also what led me to Wardley Maps. And I'll elaborate a bit on that, but really one thing that first attracted me to Wardley Maps was that it focuses on user needs. We'll dig more into that as we go forward. So starting off with the sort of 50,000-foot sort of question, just as an angle in on this presentation. The world is an ever more complicated place. So how do we make sense of it to make more informed decisions? And I don't think I need to explain for each of you that how the world is becoming more complicated, but I think if we do think about the sort of tech ecosystem and how quickly things are moving, as well as the impact of sort of a globally connected society, I think that's something we can all empathize with. So one of the things we need is better tools for organizing information. And, with today's presentation focusing on Wardley Maps, we need a little bit of help from the past. And something that I found very interesting as I got into Wardley Maps was they were a response to very modern needs, but inspired by ideas that were, in some cases, centuries old. So Wardley Maps were first in use by Simon Wardley as early as 2005, and building on ideas that he and some of his colleagues had before even then, and have over the last sort of 15 years grown in adoption pretty remarkably, with adoption by governments, the UN, many corporations, NGOs, and more and more businesses. On the right, you can see there's actually a published version of the Wardley Maps book, but that is sort of a capture of a point in time. Simon Wardley continues to actually update and evolve his book, which is available for free on Medium. I've done it again. So, all right, so let's set the scene. So it's me in 2017. Seek has these acquisitions that we've started to integrate these businesses. Some of the acquisitions are JobsDB, which is was founded in Hong Kong and had grown out across the Southeast Asian region. There was JobStreet, which was founded in Malaysia and Singapore, and again had grown out across the Southeast Asian region and was competing head-to-head with JobsDB. Seek had a thriving business in Australia and New Zealand, and also had businesses in Brazil, Mexico, China, South Africa, Bangladesh, and various other locations. And so that was great for the growth of the company. But as more and more of what we were doing was where data was at the center of how we, achieved competitive advantage, we were then looking at, well, how do we approach, making better sense of how we're organized and make some decisions. Really, we'd grown into a pretty complicated situation. Just another angle. So when we think about value at Seek, so Seek or any job board is a two-sided marketplace made up of candidates, hirers, and then internal to our business, there is also decision makers. And so what we saw in terms of our data ecosystem was amongst our customer groups and internally, data and our trust in data was directly correlated to our ability to make decisions, and even our hirers and candidates' ability to make decisions, because when we're putting data in front of them, it could be in the form of a recommendation, or it could be in the form of other data points about what other candidates or hirers are doing, which might encourage them to make a choice. It was really, in the data quality and how we were leveraging it, that where our competitive advantage would be. So all of this extra complication that I mentioned of our data ecosystem was affecting the data quality, and the biggest impact that had was it affected our pace. So anyone who's worked with data science teams will have heard the refrain that 90% of the time spent doing data science is in cleaning and preparing the data. And of course, if what is upstream has gaps or other issues with it, then the time that you spend cleaning will be even more. And so ultimately, that really affects the time spent doing analytics, the time spent doing data science, etc. So I'm moving through these slides quickly because I just want to set the scene and spend the majority of our time on the actual Wardley maps itself. Any questions so far? Is everyone following along okay?
Hi, Daniel. It's LP here. Good to see you again. Just a quick comment. I'm not sure from my end, your slide looks really blurrish. Do you have support behind you that could look into the technical, please?
Sure, can do. So the slides are blurry. Okay, so we could maybe post the link. There's not. We'll share the link afterwards. There's not. You're not missing out too much on the content beyond from the slide, beyond what I'm sharing verbally. Hopefully, when we get to the map, it is a little bit clearer.
We're also on YouTube. I've shared the YouTube link live. You may get better resolutions from YouTube servers if you're closer to them. I think we're streaming pretty high res right now.
Yeah. Cool. Keep giving us feedback on how it's coming through. Thank you. That's great. So another element. So we're so far I've described we're across multiple geographies. We've got multiple acquisitions. Each of those businesses have things like their own definition of what a job is, their own definition of a candidate profile. We have multiple different technologies for collecting the data, moving the data around, storing the data. So all of this, as we've grown, is become a really complicated situation. So the first thing that I did to sort of get a better sense of where we're at was I identified about 20 people across the Seek group from different parts of the organization working in different roles. They might be working as an analyst, they might be working as in leadership, they might be working as a data scientist, they might be working as a data engineer. All these different, people for whom, they're within an important part of the data value chain, but maybe sitting at a different vantage point. And I actually interviewed them to collect, get a sense of what were the common problems, where did they see were the opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. And what I found was across this diverse group of people, they had a clear idea of the problems affecting them, their particular teams, and they also had many ideas with how to improve. But because the organisation, the way it was arranged, was quite complicated, and there were many interdependencies, and there were many things that were duplicated, it was very difficult for any individual group to make a change of the overall system. And so what I concluded from this was, whilst there was a lot of, goodwill for change, people needed a shared view of the playing field. Apologies, there's a crying baby, which you may hear in the background. That's my son. So, put simply, there was for Seek an opportunity to be more competitive and to serve our customers better. All right, so enter stage left, Wardley Maps. So Simon Wardley's chapter from his book, Wardley Maps, the chapter titled On Being Lost, really resonated with me. Here I was facing all this complexity. I'd been asked to take a look at what was the situation and what were some sensible things that we could do. And so it felt like some of the ideas he was sharing in the Wardley Maps book, there may be an opportunity here. A little bit further on, then I discovered the mapping canvas, which back then I think it was on real-time board, which is now called Miro. And it seemed like this might be something we could do, within a group, within a workshop, which would help sort of build up this sort of shared view of what our actual situation is. I've shared Simon Wardley's Twitter link there. Ben's got an awesome resource, but one great, absolutely fantastic resource around Wardley Maps is Simon Wardley's own Twitter. So I'd highly recommend follow him there, and he is pretty constantly sharing really interesting stuff.
So he might be the reason I finally joined Twitter.
Yeah, same.
So that would be an excellent reason to join Twitter. Yeah, he has these sort of dialogues with X. So each of his tweets are, him saying something, and then and X is just a generic person that he may be having a conversation with. And so yeah, they're really interesting and insightful. So yeah, just join Twitter and only follow him and me, and follow him and me. Yeah. So I would highly recommend reading the first couple of chapters of Simon's book. It's really it's a book that you can keep coming back to. So don't worry if you don't get through his entire book in one sitting. I'm still about halfway through because each of the ideas keep building on each other. But one really interesting thing from the early chapters is when he was in this similar situation of being in an executive leadership position and feeling like he didn't, he either had missing data, and he also had in some areas too much information, and he was struggling to make sense of it. He was looking for a frame for situational awareness, and so he looked to a book that he'd read years before, which was Sun Tzu's The Art of War. And The Art of War talks about, ideas of, understanding the landscape. In this particular case, it was talking, about a map and where different military units may be positioned. But he was, sort of reapplied that idea back to, the business context. So it was like, okay, how could we think about, different businesses and the different components that make up those businesses in a spatial context. He also brings in other ideas, such as climate. So, what are the things that are affecting the environment, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I mean in terms of we're dealing with modern issues, but we're taking some ideas from the past as well. Okay, so I've shared the situation. I've gone and interviewed a bunch of people. I'm starting to build up a picture, and so what I've come across Wardley maps, and I was like, okay, let me do some of my own iterations, map some things out, and see if it's giving me some insight. Oh, something went. Did someone just join the map? Sorry, someone just joined my mirror, and I think bumped my slide. Okay, we may be back. Can you still see my slides? Yeah, great. Okay, you're welcome in there. Just don't bump my slides. So I did some iterations and started to get a sense of, yeah, we're really going to be able to answer some of these key questions we had. We had questions like, in trying to reconcile and simplify this sort of ecosystem, in some areas we want to make decisions about where we build versus buy. We want to think about, we've got all these acquisitions. How do we want to reorganize the teams, and will that be useful? We had about 10 different systems for capturing data. So how do we want to approach deduplicating those, and what sort of attributes of those systems would be the most important, such that we could actually make the right choice about what to keep and what to deduplicate, and also what to prioritize. So what things would we prioritize in changing to improve the situation? So once I started to build up this confidence, I was going, well, it's maybe not enough to sit in a dark room having collected this information and just build a map myself and then sort of throw that over the fence and say, hey, here's a map, it answers all our questions. That wasn't going to be enough to sort of build in consensus around these pretty big investments and decisions that we needed to make. So we wanted to take this group of key people in our data ecosystem on the journey with us, and so we talked with each of these people and also the leadership, and we agreed to come together in Melbourne and have a workshop, which would include working on the map together as a group. And so I'm about to switch into the actual maps themselves, and we'll walk through the different parts. But what you'll see is a version that's pretty similar to the map we worked on as a group, working through this data ecosystem problem. And probably just from a priorities point of view, it was probably actually this sort of buy-in and shared view of where things were at because in the group, that was probably our top priority. The second priority was then, could we build upon that to have a frame of reference for making decisions within? Okay. So fast forward, and we're preparing for the workshop. One of the things, I was working with another facilitator who was going to help run the session on the day. We knew that mapping itself, having tried it out as individuals, can be time consuming. And when we were flying people into a location where we'd have only a day or two together to be working on this, we wanted to make the best use of the time of the people in the room. So we chose to pre-fill some of the mapping canvas, and I'll share with you the canvas in a moment. Of the things that we felt were maybe less controversial, we would still walk people through that, and I'll walk you through that in a few minutes. Could make adjustments if there was feedback. But hopefully we're on the mark given the interviews that we've done earlier, so that the group felt they had participated and were on the journey with us. Okay, so let's jump into a map. Okay, let's skip this slide because I think I've verbalized all of this. All right, so for those of you who are just starting in mapping, given this example is pretty much sharing my early experience in mapping, this mapping canvas, of which there is a template available within Miro, and I'm sure there's templates for other software as well. I found it particularly for workshops where you're bringing multiple people along the journey and having the dual challenge of teaching them about mapping as well as building a map at the same time. I found it really helpful because it stepped through the component parts one by one. So let's jump in. So the first section seems obvious, but I actually found it one of the most helpful areas, which was to map out the purpose. And so I've shared with you a little bit of the context. And so this context and the sorts of problems that you're looking to solve, or why you're making this effort, is what you capture here. And I found it was one that, as we were working on the map, we'd keep coming back to and make edits on and refine as we made agreements as a group as to what's in and what's out. Similarly, sort of more detail around the scope. You could use this to clarify, which parts of the organization were you looking at, which parts were you not, which sorts of components, which sorts of teams, et cetera, and other elements. And again, this was an area which we would keep coming back to as we were discussing as a group and working on and iterating on our map. We'd come back here and make adjustments once we had consensus of what's in and out. So I mentioned earlier, a key part of mapping is focusing on user needs. And, I think starting with the users is what, originally attracted me to mapping. And so I mentioned some examples earlier. So for Seek's case, we had, different candidate groups. We had hire groups. We had internal stakeholders. So we listed out all these different users that we may need to consider within understanding our data ecosystem. And then we elaborated out the needs for these users. So an example might be candidates want to find a job. That's that's why they're coming to you. And so information that we're putting in our search engine and through our job recommendations and things like that are addressing those needs to sort of find, evaluate, and apply for a job. So that those might be types of needs that we address for candidates. Similarly, for hirers, they're looking to find talent. So they might have a variety of different needs relating to finding talent. For leadership within SEEK and other decision makers within SEEK, they may have specific needs, such as reporting to see the current state of the business and having data that they can trust and things like that. I'll go through more concrete examples when we go through and show a filled version of this canvas. And we also included some of the users that operate within the ecosystem, such as analysts and data scientists. They may be not at the end product, but they may be working within the ecosystem and have their own needs. Moving on, is the next section is the value chain, and it's interesting the sort of guidance that Simon Wardley gives around the value chain. He uses pretty typical value chains that so you may have seen examples from decades ago from Michael Porter. It's a common construct to show the different elements of the value chain. But one thing that Simon Wardley indicates is not necessarily to stress too much about the specifics of the value chain. You can if it's helpful, but really along this axis, it's enough to know, is it part of the visible value that is close to the users that you're trying to benefit, or is it further away from them? And that can be enough to determine where you place different components on the vertical axis. And then, having taken all of these elements that we've been building up over each of these sections, then the actual creation of the map is much more straightforward, because we've already identified our users, we've already identified their needs, we've already identified the value chain and maybe some of the components that link together in that. And then the final step is assessing for each sort of component we've identified where it sits in the evolution. And so for those of you who have previously familiar with Wardley maps would be familiar with this idea of evolution. So we've got, if you look down on the bottom axis, we've got Genesis, Custom, Product, and Commodity. I think when we get to the filled out map, it'll be more apparent. So let's dig in there. But I'm welcome to take any questions if you've got specific questions that we dig into. If I've got relevant content, I'm happy to answer them, or we can put some in the parking lot, which we can tackle after I've finished the presentation.
Daniel, I have a question, please.
Mm-hmm.
Just looking at the map, it seems very similar to the Lean canvas. Is there any reason that you choose one over the other?
It is using, from a format point of view, this canvas is using the same sort of ideas as a Lean canvas, just from a filling it out perspective. The actual map itself is just a section in 6, so your actual end product is just what's in this part that's on the screen. The other sections are just you're essentially filling in parts of the map, but you're just doing it bit by bit just to make it a bit easier. So many people who would use a Wardley map may just edit on this format. They just may not use this canvas alone. I just found it very helpful for taking a group of people who were completely new to mapping to how to do it bit by bit, as opposed to just jump into the very complicated final output of the map. In terms of how you would use a Wardley map, I would say that primarily it's focused on strategy. And so when we think of strategy, particularly in a technology space, it's things like if I know that our competitors have a customized search engine that they've built just for being the best at searching for jobs, and I am using an off-the-shelf search engine, then on a map we would see that their search engine might sit in the custom area, ours might sit in the sort of product, towards the product, between product and commodity area, and then we can be looking at that and going, well, we've made a choice, and it may be due to how much we're willing to invest and things like that, but is it the right choice, or is the choice our competitors have made to have invested in a customized solution that may be very close to where their core value is and addressing better the needs of their users? Is that something that we should be doing? Now, that's an example where you're looking directly at competitors. You might see on the map there's things that none of the competitors are doing, but because we're visualizing on the map, it may become more obvious that there is a unique bit of value that we could be investing in, and we've made a better assessment of that because we've got a visual map of the playing field. I think when we get into the concrete examples of a filled out canvas, it might become more apparent. Did that help answer your question?
Oh, sorry. Sort of. I look forward to seeing your example, and hopefully I will become clearer. And this is the first time I look at this map. So go for it, Daniel.
Excellent.
Hey, Daniel, Martin Chesbrough. One quick question, which is, I just wondered, how long do you spend explaining Wardley maps to start with versus, how long do you actually get productive work in a workshop out? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I can just share what we did, which was we shared a couple of things for people to read in advance. Truth be told, I don't think most of the attendees did read that, but I was fully expecting that. And when in the workshop, it was probably not too dissimilar to this session, in that we just went very, very high level and basically sort of trusted in the fact that as we would work through each section and go through, that people would start to follow along. Certainly the first maybe 30 to 45 minutes, people's heads were working overtime, just trying to grok what was going on. But this sort of experiential learning, where they were able to sort of participate in fleshing it out as we went, it did actually seem to land pretty quickly. I am hopeful that it plays out similarly today, and hopefully this session is a good contrast to. I think a lot of times when we get exposed to Wardley maps, we get the very theoretical side, but hopefully seeing it in action might help land some of the concepts.
Thanks, Daniel. Cheers. Keep going.
Yeah, so let's jump in. So I just, in square brackets, I've made a note here. So I'm not working at Seek anymore. I've left Malaysia and I'm in New Zealand. So I can share about the process we went through. I've used the content we produced in the workshop and before it as the inspiration, but I've slightly simplified it just to make sure there's no commercial in confidence information being shared. So everything that I've got in here are things that you can grok about the business from externally. So our purpose, and again, this is because of this a little bit high level. We had on the day a slightly more specific purpose mapped out. But I've just said for today, to help hirers, candidates, and ourselves make ever smarter decisions. And again, more specific for the purpose is actually better. So if we're doing a real case, we'd probably keep iterating on this and adding a bit more specifics. Our scope, so we wanted to improve the pace and accuracy we can work with data to improve the experience for our customers. So that was the primary area. Again, there was more detail that we had on this in the workshop that was probably a bit specific to what we were doing then as a business. But this is a fair summary of the sort of intent in terms of what we had within the scope. So now we start on the actual map. We've got the purpose and the scope that we can use as sort of a guardrail that helps us to go. It's very easy to get completely lost in the weeds, and so we use those sort of as our guardrails, and we start to map out the users. Again, I've done this slightly more coarse than we did on the day, but we've got candidates, hirers, analysts, leaders, data scientists, and we'd mapped out a lot of other roles as well. So when we think of those collection of users within our ecosystem that we want to analyze and understand how we and competitors are addressing their needs, then we start to map out, well, okay, our candidates and hirers, they're looking for intelligent features, and obviously we had more and more specific examples. Leaders are looking for trusted reports. So it's not enough just to collect lots of data and then just put data that is very raw up to leaders if they don't know the context, if they don't know where the data has come from. It's very hard for them to trust in that data. For analysts, so there's got to be a process around turning raw data into structured data. For data scientists, it's sort of the opposite. They want to have access to raw data, and again, there's various other, it could be data engineers, other roles as well. But ultimately, for this example, we'll dig into just one of the user needs and see how we can analyze it with a map. So the next piece was around the value chain, and I mentioned earlier, the most important part is to just, if we think of a user, their needs, and then the components that sort of most important for fulfilling those needs, then just thinking about each component and whether it's visible to that user or less visible, will be enough information to work out where it sits vertically on that axis. Hey, is everyone able to still hear me? Yes. Is that better? Cool. So
I think it's clearer to directly access your map on the Miro.
sure.
I'm just not sure. I have been very careful when I move the like cursing on the Miro. I'm not sure whether the audience has right to modify or just read only. But it definitely is clearer on Miro.
Great. Yeah. No. So feel free to access on the Miro. Just I know I've set the Miro public. It's possible you may be able to move things, so just be careful when clicking. All right. So we can see in this example. So I've again sort of simplified it. Like candidates and hirers looking for these intelligent features. They're powered by our data science models. Those data science models are, powered by the structured data, the enriched data, the raw data, and then we can see the relationships between each of those components. Now, again, this is not a full map, but it's starting to map out, different sort of dependencies. One of the challenges, and so this might be useful for those of you who already have started mapping. One of the challenges we found was how granular do we make our map, or how much? Because really, for any given component, you could break them down into more components and more components and so on. This actually came up as a discussion point in our workshop, and what we agreed was to only add as much detail as was needed for the conversation, so that a lot of us, being engineers and data scientists, the temptation was to add more and more detail to make a one-to-one map of the world, if you will. But we had to resist that temptation because more and more detail didn't necessarily make the maps more meaningful. And so only if to understand or discuss a particular element, would we actually maybe consider splitting out into more detail. So we did remain fairly high level. So you can see.
Is that when you come back to your purpose to decide?
Yes.
Do this level of detail to get the purpose.
That's right. Yes. So the purpose and the scope. That's why I say it was really useful, and we kept on iterating those throughout the workshop, because we could discuss the point of like, well, what's really important. We've discussed, the challenges we're facing in the business. We know which ones are affecting each group the most. And so did getting into that level of detail help us answer that? If not, then we'd leave it out. And so I found that a really good process. And so even if I didn't use the canvas, I probably would still have a purpose and scoping statement that we could continue to go back to and refine, just to help keep a lid on that. Yeah, absolutely right. Okay, so then we'll move on to the map. So essentially what we've done is, in this particular example, we, rather than dealing with every issue, or every need that we described earlier, what we decided to do, because we had a really big problem space, was to dig into just one key user need and start to map that out. And so we chose the find a job user need. And so that's one of the sort of, candidate needs, which we'd grouped under intelligent features. So essentially how could we continue to support intelligent features for finding a job. And so you can see that, some of the key engine of that was, the search experience itself, and sitting behind that, the search engine, and then those things being powered by the data science models, some of the proprietary data, some of the ontology, enrichment. We have some customized storage. We've got means for sharing data around different groups who are using and working with data. You can see there we've got a number of different data tracking solutions. I marked one, data tracking 1, data tracking 2. As I mentioned, there were actually about 10, but we've kept this one a bit simple. And then we can also see that search engine also relies on job ad data, and data storage, monitoring, and tag managers. So I'll just spend a few minutes talking about the positioning of some of the things that we've mapped out here, and why some of these components sit in those positions on the map. So let's start with the job ad data. So I think this is a really good example. So job ads are not unique to Seek. They're obviously available on all of the job board systems, and it's an area that's reasonably mature, as in, there are job posting systems, like Taleo and others. So job ads are actually in a fairly standardized, structured format. And so this is why we've placed the job ad data as being more mature within its evolution, and so put that in the product area. And so if we were coming up with another data type, that was completely novel to Seek, that component may be something that you map in the Genesis or custom areas of the evolution. So what's really powerful about this is when we look at each of these components, we can go, well, that's how it is in the current state, but we, as things commoditize over time, we could consider looking at these components and consider how they move towards the product and commodity side of the chart. And this is where some of your strategy discussions come in. Now, there may be a good reason why, for instance, we're using customized storage, but maybe we should be using a commodity storage solution like S3 on Amazon Web Services or something like that. And again, when we've got this sort of shared map of understanding about how the different components address the user need, then we can start to talk about how we might change those things. And really, if we go back to what we were trying to address, that was really where those are the conversations we wanted to be able to have as a group. Any questions around that so far?
Yes, Daniel. Could you please clarify my understanding of this mapping is for the data model, right?
So this mapping is about our data ecosystem at Seek. So when I say ecosystem, I'm thinking about all of the people and all of the elements of working with data at Seek. And so that could be anything from, the business intelligence tools. It could be how we store data. It could be the different ways data is used. So, what data scientists do with data is different from the analyst, is different from, an executive leader reviewing the reports. So all of these elements, they're interconnected, and sometimes they're using the same the same raw ingredients, and sometimes they're using very different parts. And so when things are so complicated and interconnected, you sort of need a way to be able to make sense of it, and then to assess where you are, and then start to talk about where you want to move to. So it's sort of go ahead.
Daniel, it can be the customer journey. Well, I'm just trying to read from the mural chart here. It can be the journey, the data model, anything that we could think of to put it on this chart. Is that right?
If they are essential to delivering on that user need, yes. So when I say the search experience, then that really could be the user experience, the UX, the design, where the data is showing up, all sorts of things like that. So we're looking at the whole thing from UX. I could have mapped things like, the electricity and the AWS services that we're relying on. It wasn't sort of pertinent to our analysis, so we left them off, but you really could include all of those elements in a map if you thought that it affected a strategic decision that you might make.
Right. So the focus is on the strategic aspect of it. As long as it will impact on the strategic side, we'll put it on. Also, another question, may I please?
Yes, please.
Do you use this, the one that we are staring at the moment, is that the current or to be?
That is the current, so that's the current state. But you'll see that I've got a black arrow down the bottom. And so you can see that we had multiple data tracking solutions. So one of the things that we discussed was I think we had about 10. So I think 8 out of 10 of the solutions were custom solutions, all doing the same thing. So every time someone came across a problem, they built a new custom solution. And so we had a choice to make. Maybe we thought we would have a competitive advantage by continuing to have our own custom solution, or maybe given that there are products on the marketplace that might help with the same thing, we could assess those. And so that was one of the areas of discussion. And so it was really interesting, because when everyone is, from different parts of, quite a large organization now, and in different countries and all those sorts of things, and seeing the world through their own lens, that getting consensus around doing something together can be quite challenging. But when you can see everything in the same way, it might be like, oh, it's so obvious we should be building one of these, and it might be like, and it's obvious that it's got to be custom because that'll give us a competitive advantage, or it's obvious that it should be off-the-shelf product because that's not our core, and we'll put that effort, for custom development elsewhere.
I can totally comprehend that, Daniel. Thank you very much. Now it makes sense to me.
Awesome. Well, that is great, and I thank everyone for their questions coming through, because it certainly makes presenting a lot more enjoyable for me. Does anyone else have questions around the map, or any interesting things that they've noticed around the map, and what and whether they can see any implications around some of the positioning of elements on the map?
I'm just wondering if you overlaid the candidate candidate one with some of the other personas that you had, or the journeys, to see if there's common stuff going on, or what.
Yeah, it's interesting. We originally had the intent to map out lots of different user needs, and what we found was so mapping out one user need as a group, already took a couple of hours, and we'd mapped out the most the most important one that was on our list. And it was already leading to really interesting discussions and potential decisions, or at least, you know, things that we could go away and work on. So with this particular one, we were going, well, maybe the next step, rather than mapping out the next user need, maybe mapping where we thought our competitors were for the same user need. You know, where is there evidence they may be, you know, using completely customized solutions, where was there evidence that they may be using, you know, more off-the-shelf products, and seeing how that might influence our perspectives and where we might make our investments. So that we didn't expect that going into the workshop, but that was more where we started to go.
Thank you.
Ben, I'm not tracking the time. Are you able to give me a time check? Excellent. So I've gone through most of the core content, so I'm actually happy to. I mean, there's a little bit more, but I think it may be more interesting to continue to talk about the maps, or even if people have questions around challenges within their own organizations where they may feel like maps may be a good fit. I've designed the content to be about an hour, and then Q&A and other things. I was expecting that's how we'd spend our time.
I'd like to just share some comment. I now can see how it's used. And do you think, Daniel, instead of, because coming from enterprise background, things can be really complicated, and sometimes, I mean, for me in the past, when I facilitate workshops, I could group different stakeholders together to go through exercise like this, or I could actually invite group by group to do whatever their focus is, depending on the situation. So this one probably would be more applicable to the sales and marketing team, I suppose. And then if I'm going to do it again, inviting the analysts, meaning like the delivering team, do you just like map everything on this canvas and then just get the stakeholder focus on this point number 5 and 6?
Yeah, it's a good point. There may be some things that we're mapping where a more narrow group of stakeholders is the perfect fit, and we certainly used the approach of mapping in those scenarios as well. So for instance, there was maps that I did which was looking around how we'd structure the teams and whether we'd make changes there and those sorts of things. That was probably not an exercise that you know, was appropriate as a large group exercise. It was probably one that sat with leaders or particular subgroups. But when it was more about our strategic investments and where we felt we were very interconnected, such that, you know, trade-offs to better support data science may have a consequence to our reporting analysts and vice versa. All of those things, we wanted a mechanism for getting those groups more on the same page and having a similar lens, and maybe so they could see what the long-term benefits might be of investing in a particular direction. So I would say you're absolutely right. It's very situational, and this workshop, I don't want to sell it as a complete success. It was of mixed success, and I think I have some content around here. So I mentioned the resolution that we identified different components was challenging, but our solution was to, not add more detail than was necessary and use the purpose and scope to keep that in control. So what was good, the engagement with the process and the energy levels in the workshop were high. So I think it was sort of a different tool that people hadn't used. So that was intellectually stimulating for the group, even though the first sort of 45 minutes was probably pretty heavy work for everyone, just getting their heads around it. Given it was like a 4-hour workshop, I think it's in the end added to the satisfaction. Where we'd been struggling to have these open discussions and talking about trade-offs and cooperation and things like that, we'd struggled before, and within this workshop and then following this workshop, these opened up. So that was, again, finally people had a more common sort of language to use, even though it was a visual language. For some of the group, it crystallized on the need for certain investments, things like, the duplication across different tracking systems and the fact that they were duplicated because different groups had owned them, and just agreeing to work together on a better solution, was important, and that working out the sort of, give and take, there was going to be value in that. And there was I mentioned the competitive analysis that sort of generated some excitement of going, well, hang on a second, we've got this understanding, and now we can overlay some things and see where we start making choices in terms of where we might invest or where we might leave some things to like an off-the-shelf product solution. So those were the positive. I don't think there was anything bad. I tend to be a pretty positive, upbeat sort of person, but there were a few things that I felt we felt a bit meh about. So the energy levels were high, but as I mentioned, the first third of the workshop was pretty onerous. So maybe if we did it again, we might invest more time offline, not just giving people materials to work through, but maybe smaller groups just to get them across mapping, and therefore you didn't have to do that in the workshop itself. The momentum was pretty tough to keep going. So the maps were used quite a bit in the following month, but then as time went on, the frequency with which they were referenced was less. So probably linking into the momentum there. Again, probably even better facilitation and ongoing follow-up could address some of these. So not really more a criticism of my own workshopping skills and not necessarily a criticism of mapping per se. And it was interesting, whilst it was really good at bringing good alignment around a lot of the practitioners of data, who were the majority of people in the workshops, it wasn't super great at executive alignment, and so we had to approach that in more traditional ways. So we sort of took insights from the maps and then just put it back to pretty vanilla PowerPoint presentations that didn't even refer to the maps to go and actually make our business cases and things like that. And a lot of these challenges were because various of us were in different locations, so that was an extra bit of friction for continuing momentum. And at the time, this wasn't really 100% of someone's job, so that was also a challenge. Cool. So Ben, that might be about time, but I'm happy to stick on for anyone who wants to get in to deeper questions or things like that. If yeah.
It's really good to have everyone here, and that was really good experience report. Lots of detail, and certainly great to see your thoughts on mapping. It's really great. So just a reminder, we are meeting again in 2 weeks across all of the meetups that you are coming from. So we'll see you again. It's a little bit later, I think, an hour later or something. So check the time zone. Check the time in your time zone for coming along to the next time. And yeah, like if you have any questions, if you type them in, I'll read them out. And if you want to, you can just unmute and ask Daniel some more questions about what's obviously like a real world experience. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming along.
Yep, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Daniel. Bye.
Thanks all.
I got a question.
Thanks, everybody. Go ahead.
So based on your experience